Good morning. Welcome to the Point. This past week, Governor Gretchen Whitmer delivered her first State of the State address. She talked about roads, clean drinking water, education, all things we'd heard in the campaign. Near the end of the speech, she talked about working together. She also poked a little fun at Republican leadership for sitting on their hands for most of the speech, and she came to the topic of this week's program. That's auto no-fault insurance.
The policies that I have outlined tonight will strengthen Michigan's foundation for our economic future. Next month, I will present a budget, and my budget will offer a real solution for fixing our roads and rebuilding our infrastructure. It will give frontline educators the tools they need to address the literacy crisis. And most of all, it will reflect my unwavering commitment to making Michigan the home for opportunity. The people of Michigan voted for people they believed could solve problems. There are legislative districts in our state that I won by double digits, and voters also elected Republicans to represent them. Let's prove to them, let's prove to the country that divided government doesn't have to mean gridlock. I am eager to engage with any and all people of good faith about ideas and priorities, including your ideas on bringing down car insurance rates. Well, I finally got you up. I finally got these guys on their feet. But I want to be very clear as we talk about where we are headed. I'm committed to this state and to solving problems. But I want you to know I'm going to reject anything presented as a solution that doesn't actually solve the problem or creates a new one.
Auto no-fault insurance. For decades here in Michigan, we've talked about doing something to amend, change, somehow bring down the rates, but nothing's ever happened. Now there's a new push to do something about auto no-fault insurance rates at least, and there are two separate committees, one in the Senate, one in the House. We start with the person chairing up that committee over in the Senate, Senator Eric Nesbitt. For our purposes today, we're going to be talking about auto no-fault insurance because the governor mentioned it briefly in her State of the State, but it's a subject that we've been talking about here in Lansing and in this state for decades. So I talked to one of your colleagues on the other side of the Capitol building, Representative Sabo, who's on the group that's working over in the House. I know they've met at least once. Your group has met a couple of times over here as you prepare. How do you start this conversation? How do you get the shareholders involved, or do you, and the stakeholders, and where do you try to go?
Yeah, this is about the drivers here in Michigan. They're paying the most expensive auto insurance in the nation. We're twice the amount of the national average. We're paying more than anybody else in the state. And the amazing thing is you go to Ohio, they're the number 50th state in the nation. They pay the lowest rates. So it's not our weather, it's not our special climate, it's not our industrial pass. It's the fact that we have auto insurance from the early 70s that hasn't been drastically reformed. In the 1970s, they passed auto no-fault. And this was to provide unlimited lifetime benefits, to cut down, there's too many lawsuits that was going on. We needed to cut the cost of auto insurance, so they said this was a way to do it. And now, 40-some years later, we know that the system they created in the 70s is not working for us in 2019. And so as I look into this and dive into it, as the Senate Majority Leader, Mike Shirkey asked me to take up this effort to drive down the cost of auto insurance. It's not about reform, it's about actually making it more affordable for the drivers here in Michigan. And that's something that we're starting to work on here. The insurance committee I'm on, we've met twice, and I'm in the listening and learning tour right now. And then we're going to work into putting the pen to the paper and then actually delivering the real reforms that'll drive down the cost of auto insurance.
Okay, so now I start to play my role as devil's advocate. In the 1970s, Michigan was not alone. There were a lot of states that went up to auto no-fault and implemented similar, not as generous, but similar packages. Many of them have changed their practices over the period of time. So we may be a little behind the curve
quite a bit
when
behind.
It comes to that. But first, devil's advocate question. people don't often complain about their coverage when you talk about lifetime medical benefits for catastrophic care and that type of thing, but they do complain about the cost. So are we talking about changing the benefits package coverage or the system entirely?
It takes a lot of different points in terms of be able to change the system and drive down the cost. The unique thing about Michigan is what you addressed, is that all the other states, just like you probably have a health insurance plan and my dad's on Medicare, or other folks have a Priority Health or Blue Cross plan or on VA, that in every other state that the main provider of health care is the health insurance that you purchase. Here in Michigan, just because you happen to be in a car, it's covered under that. So what do people are able to change? Their collision coverage, whether or not they're able to have a collision, or they lower that as much as possible so they can actually afford the one-size-fit-all Cadillac plan that we have on the health side. But what's the most likely thing that a poor person or somebody on a fixed income is going to happen? They're going to get in a car crash and their $10,000 car is totaled and they don't have the cost to replace that. So they go out and they try to buy another $7,000 car. Well, they already have the $10,000 loan that's out there because they didn't have the coverage to begin with, because that person on the fixed income or the poor person, and this is driving people to bankruptcy because they're not able to adjust the insurance. This is the only product that we have, insurance product where we don't have a choice in terms of, I'm expecting my firstborn in May. My wife and I, we're expecting in May, and I'm going through the term life insurance plan. What can we afford in terms of part of our budget? What does make sense to make sure that our new child's taken care of if something happens? We don't just go out and get a unlimited plan. We go out and say what fits and what makes sense to make sure our child's taken care of. Same thing with your whether it's life insurance, your health insurance, what's the deductible, what's the area, so you can change things. Your house insurance, is it replacement costs? Back on the farm, are we going to insure that outbuilding or not? Well, the cost to insure that isn't. You have that choice, and whenever you empower individuals to provide that choice, you actually provide them with the incentives of purchasing insurance that fits the level that they're able to pay, and also provides them with the level of coverage that makes sense to them. And so this is a one-size-fits-all central planning area. And so I'm open to discussing with anybody anywhere and driving down the cost of insurance, but our system here in Michigan is not working for the citizens of Michigan. When you have over 20% of drivers, 1 in 5 drivers in the state that are driving without auto insurance, you know something's wrong.
Senator Ananich was on this show last week. We talked about a lot of things, but it always comes up, auto no-fault insurance. And he said his interest would be only if you can get those costs driven down. He didn't care a great deal about the health care providers or about the attorneys or about the insurance companies. He wasn't as interested in that component as he was about driving down costs. And my question to him...
Is that why he's voted against every plan that actually drove down costs in the past? I mean, people can talk a lot, but this is about actually defending the drivers here in Michigan in terms of the cost of auto insurance.
I tell you that story to get to this point, and he said, when asked, I said, well, how do you know, even if you make reforms, how can you be sure that you drive down the cost to the consumer? Yep. And he said he was willing to have regulators take a look and keep those prices down. How would you do it? How would you guarantee that if you make changes, the rates actually go down? Yeah. How do you force that to happen?
We're the most expensive state in the nation. We have a one-of-a-kind auto insurance laws in the nation. Competition drives costs down. That competition provides more people entering the market and more choices within the market to make sure that people are able to purchase insurance. Then there's the other side, is that the cost on the healthcare side. We just had testimony earlier this week in committee talking about how when you happen to be in an auto accident, you're paying 5 times, 10 times as much as if your private pay is paying. And so there's no cost controls on the other side, which then makes it ripe for fraud and abuse in the system. And so as you look at other states, and every state in the nation has lower cost of auto insurance than Michigan does, by naturally making reforms and making us like other states, you're going to drive down the cost. The last state to do it was New Jersey in the early 90s. And their costs are dramatically lower than ours. Actually, when they get in an auto accident and happen to, and it involves a medical issue, the costs there are half as much as they are in Michigan. Is it because the auto accidents are that much worse here in Michigan? Or is there system costs in the system that need to be driven out? And that's something where we need to be very serious about that. As I went door to door last year, the number one issue that I heard day after day was that auto insurance is becoming unaffordable. I've talked to auto insurance agents who've given prices to families, to single mothers, and given them what the price is for a 6-month policy, and they cry. They're brought to tears trying to say, do I make sure that we're insured when we're in our car? Or do I have money for food or groceries or actually being able to get to work? These are serious issues that you're driving the poor in Michigan. You're essentially criminalizing the poor and adding a senior tax. When you turn 65 and get on Medicare, I was changing the oil at the local Express Lube in Paw Paw the other week, and one of the managers came out and started yelling. He just had turned 65. His premiums went up $1,800 because we're the only state in the nation where they don't coordinate care with Medicare. Only state in the nation. And because of that, seniors are paying an extra tax on their auto insurance, and that is wrong. The poor are being driven out from being able to insure what's likely one of their most valuable assets, their vehicle, and that's driving them to bankruptcy. And this should be a concern to all of us in making sure that we provide more freedom, more choice, drive down to those costs so more people are actually able to insure the assets that matter.
I got 1,000 questions, 45 seconds. So
Okay.
Here's what I'm going to ask. Because you started down this road, is one of the things you would look at, obviously, at coordinating services from your last response, but would you also be looking at a fee schedule for services provided in any type of fix that you get?
Yeah, everything's on the table, and it's something where, as we look at the cost of today with auto insurance, the average cost on the healthcare part makes up about 45% of that premium. 45 years ago when it was first enacted, it made up about 7% of that premium. And so the costs have just skyrocketed, and we really need to get a containment on these costs. I don't care what special interests I make upset. This is about the folks and the families back at home trying to put food on their table, and the biggest thing we can do to make their pocketbooks bigger and a little more money that they're able to take home is by lowering the cost of auto insurance here in Michigan.
That's the view from Republicans in the Senate, but Democrats have to weigh in too. We'll talk with one of the members of the committee from the House side next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. Governor Whitmer talked about doing something about no-fault insurance during her State of the State message, and of course, legislators have been talking about that for years. You just heard from Republicans in the Senate. Now one of the Democrats on the House committee weighs in, Muskegon Representative Terry Sabo. Representative, I want to start by saying that there are a lot of issues that I'd like to talk to you about. I'd like to talk to you about your position on appropriations and other things you're doing, but we're going to dedicate this show to something that I have been talking about since the day I became a political reporter in Michigan, and that's auto no-fault insurance. And those conversations have gone from sometimes kind of timid conversations about, well, maybe we ought to do something, to some very vociferous conversations that we are going to do something about it. The outcome's always been the same. Nothing's changed. It's remained the same for all of these years. And so now the question is, you've been put on a special committee asked by the Speaker of the House as a member of the Democratic Party, the Speaker being a Republican. So that suggests that they are very interested in having your input and input from your constituents about this really important issue. And so before we start going through all of the pitfalls and the problems, what was your reaction when the Speaker asked you to be part of this?
Well, actually, I was quite surprised. It was something that I didn't see coming, so it kind of blindsided me a little bit. But I'm very thankful for the Speaker for allowing me to have that opportunity to serve on this committee. It's something that I hear about in my daily life as far as conversations go and what are some of our top issues as a state. And it always comes up as the auto insurance rates are way too high. And I really believe it's a nonpartisan issue because as a Democrat, I go to union meetings and I hear about it from my union friends. I talk to some of my Republican friends who have told me the exact same thing, that these rates are too high and something needs to be done. And so I look forward to serving on this committee.
You and I live in relatively the same area in West Michigan. So our rates are considerably lower than some of your colleagues and their constituents that live in Southeast Michigan. I mean, they can be double what ours are, and I suggest that none of us particularly like the rates that we're paying. So this is a big problem that impacts the whole state, but it impacts the state somewhat differently. One of the issues is how much we pay. But the question then comes in, if we're not going to pay that much, what does the coverage look like? You've had your first meeting, and I don't expect you to divulge everything you guys talked about, but where does the conversation start? I mean, you've got all these stakeholders, but the ultimate stakeholder, I suspect, is the ratepayer, right?
Well, I'll go back. As far as how our process is going to work, I have a lot of confidence in the chair of our committee, Representative Wentworth. He has laid out a plan to us as far as his process goes, in that we're going to start from the ground level, which we did yesterday at our first meeting, yesterday being on Wednesday.
Right.
And I'm very encouraged by that, because we're going to take it at a slow pace. The chair has laid that out, and that we should all come into it with an open mind, and that's what I intend to do. I'm trying to come into it with no preconceived ideas as to how to fix it. I want to learn everything that I can about the origins of no fault, and then work our way on up and see if through that process that we can find a way to lower these rates. I think that's the number one goal.
As you point out, you've just had your first meeting, but the announcement that you were going to be on this committee came a few weeks ago, shortly after the new House reconvened. And I suspect you don't have to answer this question, but I'll ask it anyway. Have you seen a noticeable uptick in the people who have contacted you and wanted to talk to you about auto no-fault insurance? Because in Lansing, auto no-fault is considered full employment for all lobbyists.
Absolutely, I have. There's no denying that, but it's understandable. There's a lot of interest in the auto no-fault setup that we have here in Michigan, and a lot of people want to protect it, a lot of people want to get rid of it, but the bottom line is that I think our residents are speaking loud and clear in that we need to lower rates. And so I'm encouraged by the process and the path that the chair has laid out, and I intend to follow him along that path. That doesn't mean that we're going to have the same conclusion throughout that path or at the very end. But I think it's a path that's going to give us all the information that we need to make a decision on what's best for not only for Michigan, but also for our residents in our own districts.
I did an interview sometime in the past few weeks with one member of leadership, and I won't assign it to him because I can't remember exactly who said it, but they said something to the effect that if you bring all of the parties together, or even if you don't, if you just come up with some kind of agreement that ends up benefiting consumers, and if everybody walks away a little bit unhappy, that may be the best deal. Is that, if there is a deal, is that what it's going to have to be? Everybody's going to have to leave something on the table because nobody's going to get everything they want?
Well, I'm not sure if that's going to be the way to get it done. I really believe that having various opinions and how we get it done is going to be very crucial. And that's why I'm very encouraged by this process that the chair has laid out, because we're going to give everybody the opportunity to come in and not necessarily talk about why it's bad to do one thing or another, but how do we fix this issue of lowering rates? What is their contribution to that solution? So I'm looking forward to that very much.
So when you look at the interest groups, you have insurance companies, you have lawyers, you have healthcare providers. Obviously, you have the folks who pay for the auto insurance. I'm sure I'm leaving out people in there. So when you bring all these different folks in and they all have different viewpoints, how hard is it, and you may not know, but how hard is it going to be to balance everybody's wishes and desires against the end game, which I assume is to lower rates, right?
Exactly. That in my book, that's what the number one goal of this committee is to lower the rates. That's what our residents have told us. In my opinion, our residents, our ratepayers, are the ones who are obligated to have the no-fault coverage to begin with. They are the number one special interest group in this whole process. Are we going to make everybody happy in the long run? that's a question that remains to be seen. You never can make everybody happy, but I think just going through this process, hearing from all the stakeholders, and making a decision after that is the best way to go.
Mayor of Detroit has been very much on this issue. We have had conversations. We've seen bills sent from the Senate to the House that in some way might change coverage. But in the state of Michigan, people have gotten used to the nation's most generous coverage when it comes to catastrophic care. There has been a suggestion in the past, not in your committee, but in the past, there has been a suggestion that coverage might be elective, that you might be able to choose different levels of service or of coverage. Is that something that you would entertain, changing this unique insurance coverage that we have?
Well, I think everything is on the table in my mind. When I look at this, I come into it with an open mind. Now, I see and hear about the rates in Detroit, and I sympathize with the residents of Detroit. There's no doubt about that. But my number one goal is to answer to the people of the greater Muskegon area. And so while I certainly respect the mayor of Detroit and his opinion, I don't answer to the mayor of Detroit. I answer to the people back in Muskegon, which I think really reflects a lot of Michigan as a whole, and let's face it, we have very high rates, and those high rates need to be looked at. And why are we paying those high rates, and what do we get for those high rates? So hopefully, at the end of this process, we're going to come down to something that potentially could do that, could lower those rates.
Dawns on me as we were having the conversation before we started to record this that you've been in public service all your life. You were in law enforcement, you were a firefighter, you're county commissioner. You're in your second term?
Second term.
As a state representative. If you and your colleagues are successful, and if you can concur with the Senate, and if whatever that concurrence would be something the governor would sign, this would be a really big milestone on that career of public service, because this would impact everybody in the state of Michigan in a pretty fundamental way, wouldn't it?
It certainly would, and but I really look at that in all the different issues that we face, not only just with the auto no fault, but when it comes to state budgets. Everything that we do here in Lansing affects everybody here in the state of Michigan. So I don't look at this as something that's going to project my career or knock the career down. This is just about doing the job that we were brought here to do.
We only have about 30 seconds left, but quickly, I've got to mention your role on appropriations. That's another really big, overarching committee, perhaps one of the biggest here in the State House. You guys are going to get underway probably the first week of, you've already gotten underway, but once the governor delivers her budget on March 5th or whenever that's going to happen. Between those two issues, you're not going to have a lot of downtime this year, right?
Not a lot of downtime, but that's okay. That's the way I've always led my life as a child growing up, as well as into my professional career. So I look forward to working with the governor and the plans that she's going to bring out with her budget coming up, and trying to make that a realization for the rest of our residents here in the state of Michigan.
The work is only now just beginning. The question about reforming or changing no-fault insurance could go on for months, although some legislators have suggested that the best chance to get it done is doing it early in this legislative session before divisions over budgets and other things could develop. We'll see if that happens, and we'll continue to report back to you. And we'll have a final note next to the point. The conversation about auto no-fault insurance has begun in Lansing, but it has happened many times before. The question is, can divided government actually help in this process, giving both the Republicans and Democrats some cover for compromise? That's what we'll be watching every Sunday to the point.